Tuesday, just restating for those just tuning in, the breaking news we just saw a moment ago this is a shocker, right? Joe Biden has decided not to go to Angola as a massive hurricane is about to bear down on Florida, while, by the way, people are still recovering from the massive hurricane of a few weeks ago. So no word on whether that was Hunter or Joe Biden who told Joe he wasn't allowed to go. Or maybe it was Kamala. We don't know, but look, this would be a lot more amusing if these people weren't supposed to be the leaders of our country right now. They talk about chaos. This is chaos. And speaking of that chaos, it was just last week in the midst of the response, or well, at least the personal response to Hurricane Helene, as FEMA was trying to figure out what it wanted to do with itself, that we had a massive strike occur with the longshoremen, which, it ended almost as quick as it started. And I want to talk to Mark Mix, who is the president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, an old friend of the show. Mark, welcome back. So tell me here, do you think that it was this wonderful negotiations behind the scenes by the co-president, Kamala Harris, that solved this, or are we just dealing with more politics as usual?
Well, Joe, you know the answer to that. Good. It's good to be on with you again. It's all about politics. Biden, Harris, well, I won't say Harris Biden or the Harris handlers or the Harris presidency today understood very clearly that a long strike by the International Longshoremen's Association could have devastating impacts on her politics and her election, as well as maybe having some impact on the economic health of the country. No doubt about it, union officials, particularly the International Longshoremen Association, President Harold Daggett, has been able to parlay his control over the ports all the way from Portland, Maine, all the way to Houston, Texas, and basically shut down the entire East Coast with this monopoly power that union officials have been granted. And everyone knew, the economists knew, Wall Street knew, blue-collar workers knew, union workers knew, moms going to the grocery stores, dad going to the grocery stores knew that if the supply chain was cut off, it was going to be a big problem. But to your point, Joe, it militated probably a greater impact on the political nature of the elections being, 5 weeks away at the time. And that's what got them back on the job and got them. It's not over yet because they're coming back January 15th to talk about it all again. And there's many issues that are still relevant and still important that may end up causing economic harm as we move into the next year.
Now, you point out the January 15th date. I want to come back to that in a moment. It's fair warning. It's going to be kind of a crystal ball question, but you'll see what I mean in a moment. But you mentioned Harold Daggett. Now, I'm a big movie guy, pop culture. To me, he comes across as central casting for you. If you said, look, I need a union thug to be in this TV show or this movie I'm putting on, this would be the accent and all. This would be the guy you'd bring out. Have him talking about fair share and being paid. No one he gave that profanity-laden statement about no one gave a bleep about us. Now we're going to hurt you. Literally says we want to hurt you so we can get a 70% pay raise, only to learn the guy makes $1 million a year. Just he's such an everyday guy. He just sold his 80-foot yacht, which obviously he's hurting, right? He had to sell his 80-foot yacht. This all seems like it really can't be real when we get to the facts, but this is our reality right now.
Yeah, indeed it is. And you're right. I think that also, the persona of Harold Daggett was another issue in getting this thing settled quickly because all of a sudden the focus was on this guy. And you're right, Joe. This is, the movie On the Waterfront was predicated on the International Longshoremen Association with the organized crime, corruption, and all the things that went on at the ports. That movie was made, I think, in relation to this particular union. And no question about it. You're exactly right. Harold Daggett became the centerpiece of this strike. And I know that not only did the politicians want him off the air, but I probably as union members, as rank and file union members did too, because the way he talked when he said, I'm going to cripple you, you have no idea how we're going to hurt you. He grabbed his throat when he talked about the power that he has over the economy. And Joe, there's a larger issue here, and it is the issue of monopoly. Union officials, a single union has been granted this power. And the National Labor Relations Board, currently appointed and confirmed by a Democrat Senate and a Democrat president, and Joe Biden, has basically given this union license to basically go after non-union employees that work on a couple of ports on the East Coast, mainly in South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia. And we believe here at the Right to Work Committee, that's going to be one of the issues that comes up on January 15th is this idea that they want no non-union workers at all on any of the ports on the East Coast.
Now, we're talking with Mark Mix. He's the president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, as well. There's a sister organization, National Right to Work Committee. I want to talk about the differences in a moment. But you were saying, you brought up January 15th again. You know, my read on this, and again, you're the expert. You've been working in these trenches for a long time. But obviously, we know they don't hide the relationship between the Biden regime, for that matter, the Harris-Biden regime, and organized labor, their dependence on it. Although she has failed to get the Teamsters endorsement, she's failed to get the Firemen's Union endorsement. And then now with this temporary stay on the longshoremen's strike, they picked January 15th, which is prior to the new president being sworn in, as though they're kind of hedging their bet that they're like, well, we don't think she can really pull this off, so we're going to make sure we have a date before Donald Trump becomes president so that we at least have some leverage where they I think they'd have no leverage if President Trump is sworn in for his second term.
Yeah. Joe, come on, man. You know there's no politics involved in any of this. There'd be no thinking like that. I'm using my finger quotes here just to make sure that everyone knows that's sarcasm. But anyway, yeah, you're right. It's about politics, and the issue is going to be extremely ripe at that point. They did get their 62% pay increase. They were asking for 77%. And the interesting part about this, Joe, is that the union is negotiating with this United States Maritime Alliance, which is basically the shippers. This is not the ports. The ports are providing the platform for this work, but it's the United States Maritime Alliance, which includes companies from Europe and East Asia. And I think they have 40 members that are negotiating these terms and conditions of employment for the ports on the East Coast of the United States of America. And so it's really a fascinating study in kind of how we respect the sovereignty of our ports and our property here when we concede it to these international shippers and this International Longshoremen's Union that really talks about shutting down all of the ports around the globe to maximize their power. And there's a lot of power here. I mean, demanding and getting now what is an agreement on a temporary agreement on 62% pay raise if they go back to work. And the whole idea of this negotiation, there are several issues, including automation, Joe. They don't want any automation. They don't want any semi-automation. They don't want any non-union members on the docks or on the terminals anywhere on the East Coast. So there's a lot more to be decided here. And I suspect that if January 15th date rolls around and Trump is being sworn in as president, they will get incredibly more reticent to any type of agreement, and they'll try to blame and hang the economy meltdown on President Trump. I think there's probably that's in the cards as well.
Now, I have to just point out, I mean, again, 77% increase. They got a 62% increase. I think most Americans, if they went to work this morning and their boss said, you know, Mark, you've been doing great, I'm going to give you a 62% pay increase, most people would be like, hell yeah, we're good to go. I'm pretty excited. They're like, well, we'll take this, but we're going to get ours. I mean, the mindset, and again, the language, not just Daggett. I heard Johnny Dixon, who's one of their local chapter presidents, and they don't even seemingly know they're using the language of communism, this whole like, we're going to force our share. It all needs to be forced equality and these things. I mean, it's stunning how out of contact they are with reality. And I want to use it to go to I know you guys put a notice out on October 3rd, basically saying to union members, you know, you don't have to put up with this kind of ridiculousness that puts your job in jeopardy.
Yeah, that's one of the things we do when these large labor union disputes or strikes come up is make sure that employees understand what their rights are. And they do have rights, Joe. No, the union officials are not going to tell them. In fact, one of the really sad stories about some of the work that we do at the Legal Defense Foundation, the Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, is represent employees, for example, nurses who wanted to go to work and take care of their patients when their union calls a strike and says you got to leave the hospital or leave the health center and walk the picket line. Now, a lot of workers will want to do that. A lot of people want to do that, and that's fine and good. But there are some people that say, you know what, I disagree with what's happening here. So when we put out these statements, these legal notices that say, hey, before you try to exercise your rights, before you cross that picket line, and probably crossing a picket line with this particular union would be extremely dangerous, one would think, based on the rhetoric and the language and the attitude of the top officials of this union. But yeah, we want to make sure that employees know that they do have rights. They can continue working during a labor dispute, but they have to do it exactly right. Otherwise, they're subject to an internal kind of kangaroo court inside the union. We've had employees that have come to us that have been fined up to $40,000 for crossing a picket line. We've helped those employees. We've had grocery workers that have been fined $3,000 or $4,000 in order to go back to work. And the union has this power over them inside of this internal discipline mechanism of the union. So it's important they do it right. That's what we're trying to do. We did that with the UAW strike. We did it with the railroad strike. And we did it with this particular ILA strike. And we'll continue to do it, helping workers understand what their rights are in the workplace.
And with that, for those, again, that may have not heard you when you've been on with us before, you have two organizations, kind of sister organizations. There's the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation and then the National Right to Work Committee. If you will, kind of just explain why two different groups and kind of how they interact and where people, because we do have a lot of people that listen to the show that work, if they don't work in unions, their work is think of like the truckers, for example. Their lives are deeply impacted when the ILA goes on strike. So I think it's important they understand where you guys fit into this and the great work you do.
Yeah, Joe, two groups. The first is the National Right to Work Committee. That's our legislative arm. We track legislation in all 50 states and watch what's happening here in Washington, D.C. Basically, our goal is to protect individual workers' rights, whether it comes at state-level legislation or here in Congress. You won't be surprised to know that union officials and their Democrat colleagues here in Congress have tried to repeal all the right-to-work laws in the country. We're fighting that. We're mostly on defense here on Capitol Hill because of the Biden administration, the executive branch, and the Senate are pushing for expanded power over workers. The Legal Defense Foundation has been around since 1968. We have 19 staff attorneys that do nothing but help employees exercise their rights in the workplace. And basically, it's real simple. We try to help employees whether or not they're navigating, they want to be in a union, want to be out of a union, whether they're being attacked by a union. We'll provide free legal aid to those employees. We've represented literally hundreds of thousands of employees. We've argued 18 cases in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. We've won dramatic precedents for workers, for individual workers who've had the courage to stand up and fight for their rights, and we'll continue to do that. And so the committee does the legislation, the foundation does the litigation, and that's kind of a full-orbed view of how we try to protect individual workers' rights in America. So
what you're telling me is, like, you probably get a pretty substantial gift from Harold Daggett every year for all the great great support that you bring to his work and his efforts, right?
Well, no, but interesting stuff, Joe, and you've touched on this a little bit. The disconnect between rank and file workers, those workers that union officials claim to represent, and union officials like Harold Daggett and Sean O'Brien at the Teamsters and Sean Fain at the United Auto Workers Union is growing wider and wider and wider because, to your point, the union officials are using kind of the rhetoric of socialism, the rhetoric of Marxism, and yet rank and file union members are attracted to policies like that Trump is articulating, like secure the border, lower our taxes, reduce regulation, bring jobs back to the United States of America, enforce laws and cut crime. I mean, those are issues that are bread and butter for most Americans, and those are bread and butter for many union officials. And that's why Sean O'Brien wouldn't allow the Teamster unions to endorse Donald Trump, even though 60%, I think 58% in one poll and 59% in another poll said they supported Donald Trump. Now, if they're the most democratic institutions in America, why wouldn't they endorse Donald Trump? Because his views are in line with the rank and file members that the Teamster union officials claim they represent. The same with Sean Fain and the United Auto Workers Union. He said after they'd endorsed Joe Biden back in January of this year, he went on TV and said, quote, "Let me be clear, the great majority of our members are not going to be voting for Joe Biden." I mean, how in the world can a union official stand up out in the public and say, we're not going to do what our members that we claim to represent want us to do? It's ridiculous, and it's about union power, and that's why the committee and foundation have been designed and why we continue to fight for individual workers' rights.
Now, they can learn more, by the way. They can go to nrtw.org. That's for the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, or nrtwc.org for the other organizations. Speaking with the president of both, Mark Mix, I've got like 30 seconds. Charlie's going to cut my head off for this, but I just have to ask, in all of your years, obviously watching the unions, have you ever seen this kind of rejection by the big unions of a Democrat presidential candidate. I mean, I think this is more significant than people realize, that she's not getting these endorsements.
It really is, and she's in trouble because her policies are out of step with most rank-and-file Americans, whether they be union members or non-union members. They're out of touch, and that's going to reflect itself, I think, probably come November 5th.
From your lips to God's ear to the voting ballots, Mark Mix, I appreciate it. As always, learn a lot when you're with us. Check him out. As I said, it's Mark Mix, President, National Right to Work, Legal Defense Foundation, NRTW.org. If you're in a union and you want to make a change, these are the guys that can help you. Thank you, Mark.
The Regular Joe Radio Show.